The observation deck of the Galactic Council's flagship Eternal Vigilance stretched across 300 meters of reinforced crystalline panels, offering an unobstructed view of the void where humanity's final stand would take place. Commander Zektar of the Vorthak hegemony pressed his four-fingered hand against the cool surface, his crimson eyes reflecting the distant stars. In 47 cycles of military service, he had witnessed the fall of 17 civilizations. None had fought with the desperate fury of the humans. Commander, his aide, Lieutenant Velmoth, approached with measured steps that barely disturbed the silence. The final human vessel has been located. A single fighter craft, designation unknown. It appears to be waiting. Zektar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement among his kind. The Vorthak were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 3 meters tall with chitinous exoskeletons that had evolved to withstand the harsh conditions of their homeworld. They respected strength, honored courage, and understood the warrior's code that transcended species. But humans were different. They fought not just with strength, but with something the Vorthak had never encountered before, an absolute refusal to accept defeat even when logic demanded surrender. One ship, Zektar mused, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones characteristic of his species. One human, against the assembled might of 12 stellar nations. The human Galactic War had lasted 7 Earth years. What began as a territorial dispute over mining rights in the Kepler 442 system had escalated into the most brutal conflict the galaxy had witnessed in millennia. Humanity, the youngest race to achieve faster-than-light travel, had somehow managed to hold off a coalition of civilizations for nearly a decade. They had introduced tactics that violated every conventional understanding of warfare, strategies that bordered on madness, and weapons that seemed to emerge from the depths of human desperation rather than any scientific principle. The humans had lost 97% of their colonies. Earth itself lay in ruins, its surface scarred by orbital bombardment. The last human fleet had been destroyed at the Battle of Proxima Station 3 cycles ago. By all calculations, by every metric of military science, humanity was extinct. Yet here they were, tracking down one final vessel that refused to surrender, refused to run, refused to die quietly in the darkness between stars. Zektar had studied human warfare extensively. He had read their military histories, analyzed their tactical evolution, tried to understand the psychological mechanisms that drove them to such extraordinary lengths. Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, Patton, Rommel, names that had become known throughout the galaxy as the architects of a military philosophy that defied comprehension. But it was one quote, attributed to an ancient human philosopher named Nietzsche, that had haunted Zektar's thoughts: "The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others." What did it mean to destroy one's weak self? The Vorthak understood weakness as a physical limitation to be overcome through training and genetic enhancement. But humans seemed to view weakness as something deeper, something that could be transcended through sheer force of will. Zektar had witnessed human soldiers continue fighting with injuries that would have killed most species. He had seen human commanders sacrifice themselves without hesitation to save their subordinates. He had watched human civilians take up arms against professional warriors, knowing they faced certain death, simply because the alternative was surrender. "Sir," Velmotha's voice interrupted his contemplation. "The human vessel is moving. It's heading directly for us." Zektar's attention snapped back to the tactical display. The lone human fighter, a sleek craft barely 30 meters long, was indeed accelerating toward the massive Galactic Council fleet. 12 dreadnoughts, 47 cruisers, 200 escort vessels, and over 1 million personnel. The mathematical absurdity of the situation would have been amusing if not for the cold certainty that this human pilot had some plan that would cost lives before the end. Alert status to maximum. Prepare point defense systems. Order all vessels to maintain formation but ready for evasive maneuvers. Zektar's commands flowed with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned commander. And open a communication channel to the human vessel. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of the human fighter's cockpit. The pilot was younger than Zektar had expected, perhaps 25 Earth years, though the stress of prolonged warfare had etched lines around his eyes that spoke of experiences far beyond his chronological age. His uniform was patched and worn, his equipment showing signs of field maintenance that had kept it functional long past its designed lifespan. But, his eyes held something that made Zektar's warrior instincts sharpen with recognition. I am Commander Zektar of the Vortak Hegemony, speaking for the Galactic Council. Identify yourself, human. The pilot's lips curved in what humans called a smile, though this expression held no warmth. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, Terran Defense Force. Serial number 7749 Delta Alpha 9. I suppose you're here to accept my surrender. If you are prepared to discuss terms, I'm not surrendering, Commander. Chen's voice carried a casual tone that seemed wildly inappropriate for the circumstances. I just wanted to talk to you before we get started. Professional courtesy, you understand. One warrior to another. Zektar felt his secondary arms twitch slightly, a Vortak stress response he had thought long conquered. There was something in the human's manner that suggested intimate knowledge of death, not as an abstract concept but as a close companion. What is your intention, Lieutenant Chen? My intention? Chen leaned back in his pilot's seat, his hands resting casually on the controls. My intention is to complete my mission. You see, Commander, you've made a fundamental error in your understanding of this war. You think you've won because you've destroyed our fleets, occupied our worlds, reduced our civilization to ash. But that was never what this war was about. The tactical display showed the human fighter continuing its approach at a steady velocity that would bring it within weapons range in approximately 4 minutes. Zektar noted that the vessel's energy signatures were unusual. Power readings fluctuated in patterns that didn't match any known human technology. Elaborate, Lieutenant. Chen's expression grew more serious, and, for a moment Zektar glimpsed something profound in the human's eyes, not hatred, not anger, but a kind of terrible understanding. This war wasn't about territory or resources for any of the usual reasons species fight. This was about proving something. About showing the galaxy what humans become when everything else is stripped away. You wanted to see what was left when you destroyed our weakness. Congratulations, Commander. You're about to find out. The readings from Chen's fighter were becoming increasingly erratic. Power spikes that suggested massive internal modifications, energy patterns that resembled no known weapon system but bore disturbing similarities to the exotic radiation signatures associated with stellar fusion processes. Sir, Velmotha's voice carried a note of alarm that penetrated even Vortak emotional control. That vessel, the energy readings are consistent with an uncontrolled fusion cascade. Sir, I believe that fighter has been converted into a stellar bomb. Zektar's mind raced through the implications. A stellar bomb, a theoretical weapon that humanity had never demonstrated the ability to construct. The technology required would be beyond anything they had shown during the war. Unless they had been hiding capabilities, saving them for this moment. Lieutenant Chen, Zektar said carefully, you cannot seriously intend to detonate a stellar device in this system. The gravitational disruption alone would affect 3 inhabited worlds. Millions of innocent lives innocent? Chen's laugh was sharp and bitter. Where were these innocent lives when Earth burned? When the orbital platforms rained death on our cities? When my daughter's school was vaporized along with 6 million other children? The pilot's composure cracked slightly, revealing the raw grief beneath. No, Commander. There are no innocent lives in this war anymore. You taught us that. 2 minutes to weapons range. The fusion cascade readings were entering critical parameters. Even if they destroyed Chen's fighter now, the explosion might be sufficient to trigger the stellar bomb effect. Zektar found himself facing a tactical situation he had never encountered, an enemy willing to commit mutual annihilation on a scale that would make martyrs of both sides. You would murder millions to kill 12 fleets? Zektar asked. I would murder millions to save billions. Chen's voice was steady now, professionally calm. Because this isn't about revenge, Commander. This is about ending the war. Really ending it. You see, the Galactic Council made one critical miscalculation. You assumed that defeating humanity meant breaking our will to fight. But you never understood what our will was built on. Zektar gestured to Velmoth, who immediately began coordinating evacuation procedures. But even at maximum FTL capability, most of the fleet couldn't escape the blast radius in time.
Explain. Chen adjusted his course slightly, angling toward the center of the formation. Humans don't fight because we're strong, Commander. We fight because we're weak.
Every human who ever lived has been weak, physically, emotionally, morally weak compared to what we could be. But some of us learn to destroy that weakness, to burn it out of ourselves until only purpose remains.
You wanted to know what humans become when you strip everything else away? We become whatever is necessary to protect what matters.
The fusion readings spiked again.
1 minute to critical range. Around the observation deck, emergency lighting bathed everything in amber warning colors.
Zektar could hear the controlled chaos of a fleet preparing for disaster, but his attention remained fixed on the human pilot who held their lives in his hands.
What purpose drives you, Lieutenant Chen?
For the first time, Chen's expression softened slightly.
My daughter's name was Sarah.
She was 7 years old when your alliance bombed the civilian evacuations at New Geneva.
She wanted to be a veterinarian, loved animals more than anything in the universe. When she died, I had a choice.
I could let grief destroy me, or I could destroy the part of myself that was capable of being destroyed by grief. I chose to burn out everything weak, everything soft, everything human except the one thing that mattered, making sure no other parent has to watch their child die because some galactic council decided humans don't deserve to exist. 30 seconds to optimal detonation range. The stellar bomb readings showed a fusion cascade that would consume not just the fleet but the entire star system, converting the local star into a temporary supernova that would irradiate neighboring systems for decades. Zektar realized with cold certainty that Chen wasn't bluffing. The human had somehow acquired or developed technology that could crack the fundamental forces holding matter together, and he was prepared to use it.
Lieutenant, Zektar said quietly, if you detonate that device, you will not only destroy this fleet.
The radiation pulse will sterilize this entire sector. Billions will die, including humans in the labor camps throughout the region. Chen's smile returned, but this time it carried genuine warmth.
Commander, you still don't understand. There are no humans in those camps anymore.
We evacuated them 3 cycles ago using ships you never detected. Every human civilian in Council space has been relocated to vessels hiding in dark matter clusters beyond your sensor range. What you're looking at right now is the last human soldier in known space. And, in about 15 seconds, I'm going to show your alliance what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness. The fusion cascade reached critical threshold. Zektar watched the readings spike beyond any possible containment as Chen's fighter crossed into the heart of the fleet formation. The human pilot looked directly into the camera with eyes that held no fear, no hatred, only a terrible kind of peace. Commander Zektar, Chen said formally, I want you to survive long enough to deliver a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them that humanity thanks them for teaching us what we really are. And tell them that the 50,000 humans currently hidden throughout Council space will remember this lesson.
We know your worlds now. We know your weaknesses.
And we have learned to destroy our own weakness so thoroughly that you will never be able to destroy us. The screen went white as the stellar bomb detonated. 3 cycles later, Commander Zektar stood in the Council chambers on Zentari Prime, his right arm encased in a regeneration field, his exoskeleton still bearing the scars of radiation exposure that had burned through his ship's emergency shielding. Of the 12 fleets that had surrounded Lieutenant Chen, only 17 vessels had survived the blast, and most of those were heavily damaged.
The star system itself was gone, collapsed into a black hole that would serve as a permanent monument to human determination. But the real damage was only beginning to manifest. The reports are confirmed, Senior Counselor Vorthak announced to the assembled delegates. Human strike teams have infiltrated 17 Council worlds in the past 3 cycles. They have demonstrated capabilities we never detected during the war, stealth technology that renders them invisible to our sensors, weapons that can neutralize our defensive systems, and coordination suggesting a command structure that survived the destruction of Earth. Zektar listened to the litany of attacks with growing respect for an enemy he had underestimated. The humans had used the war as a learning experience, allowing the Council to believe they were winning while secretly developing countermeasures for every weapon, every defense, every tactical doctrine the allied species possessed.
The scattered groups now emerging from hiding were not refugees but advanced reconnaissance units that had been positioned years in advance. They have made no demands, Counselor Mervat of the hegemony continued. No communication beyond a single message broadcast on all frequencies 3 days ago. They simply stated, "We learned your lesson. Now we will teach you ours." The attacks followed a pattern that demonstrated intimate understanding of each species' psychology. The Vortak military installations were struck with precision that left no doubt about human intelligence capabilities. The economic centers of the trade-focused Solani were disrupted with surgical accuracy. The religious sites of the spiritually driven Mortai were left completely untouched while military targets nearby were destroyed, sending a clear message about human tactical discrimination. But it was the nature of the attacks that truly unsettled the Council. The humans fought with a cold efficiency that showed no interest in vengeance or cruelty. They killed only when necessary, destroyed only military targets, and demonstrated a level of tactical restraint that spoke to supreme confidence in their abilities. This was not the desperate fury of a dying species, this was the calculated precision of apex predators who no longer saw any species in the galaxy as a significant threat. Honored counselors, Zektar spoke for the first time during the session, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had looked into the abyss and found it looking back. I had the honor of speaking with Lieutenant Chan before his sacrifice. He conveyed to me a fundamental truth about human nature that I believe this council has failed to grasp. We assumed that by destroying their civilization, we would break their spirit. Instead, we forced them to burn away every aspect of their identity except their core purpose. We created an enemy that literally has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The council chamber fell silent. Representatives from 12 species, each convinced of their own superiority, contemplated the possibility that they had awakened something beyond their ability to control. What do you recommend, Commander? Senior Counselor Vorthak asked. Zektar considered his words carefully. In the 3 cycles since the stellar bomb detonation, he had studied everything available about human military philosophy. The quote that Lieutenant Chen had embodied, "The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others," had led him to examine human concepts of self-improvement, self-sacrifice, and the transformation of weakness into strength. I recommend immediate ceasefire negotiations, he said finally. Not because we cannot defeat them militarily, but because we already have defeated them militarily. The humans we face now are not the same species we went to war against. They are what remains when everything weak has been burned away. They are what we created by forcing them to choose between extinction and evolution. And they have chosen evolution. You speak as if they are no longer human, observed Counselor Yeltera of the Scientific Collective. Perhaps they are not, Zektar replied. Lieutenant Chen spoke of destroying his weak self to protect what mattered. What if an entire species has undergone that transformation? What if we are no longer facing humans at all, but something new, something that humans become when survival requires them to transcend their limitations? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Each delegate understood the implications. If humanity had somehow evolved beyond their original psychological and tactical constraints, if they had become something that could not be defeated through conventional means, then the war had not ended with Earth's destruction. It had simply entered a new phase that the Council was unprepared to fight. We have intercepted communications between the human cells, reported Intelligence Director Kex Mot. They refer to their current phase as the teaching. They appear to view their attacks not as acts of war but as educational demonstrations. Each strike is precisely calibrated to show us capabilities we didn't know they possessed, weaknesses in our defenses we hadn't considered, and tactical possibilities we haven't explored. They are teaching us to fear them. Zektar nodded grimly. And they are succeeding. Because they have learned something that our military academies do not teach. True strength comes not from what you can do to your enemy, but from what you are willing to do to yourself to achieve victory. The humans have demonstrated that they will sacrifice anything, their worlds, their civilization, their very identity, to accomplish their objectives. How do you defeat an enemy that has already destroyed everything about themselves except their purpose? The implications were staggering. Military doctrine across all allied species was based on the assumption that enemies could be defeated by threatening their survival, their resources, their loved ones. But humans had voluntarily sacrificed all of these things, transforming themselves into something that existed purely to fulfill their mission. They had become an enemy that could not be threatened because they had already given up everything that could be threatened.
What is their purpose now? Asked Counselor Mervat. Unknown, Kexmot admitted.
Their attacks suggest multiple possible objectives. Some analysts believe they seek simple revenge.
Others theorize they are attempting to establish dominance through demonstration of superior capabilities.
But there is a third possibility that concerns our psychological warfare specialists.
Which is that they are teaching us to become like them.
Each attack demonstrates not just their capabilities, but the flaws in our own thinking. They show us how we rely too heavily on technology, how we underestimate opponents, how we assume victory based on superficial advantages. It is possible that their true objective is to force us to evolve as they have, to destroy our weak selves and become worthy opponents.
The concept was so alien that several delegates struggled to process it.
The idea that an enemy might fight not to destroy you but to improve you challenged every assumption about the nature of conflict. Yet it aligned perfectly with what Zektar had observed of human military philosophy. They seemed to view war not as a contest between rivals but as a process of mutual development that revealed the true nature of all participants. If that is true, Senior Counselor Vorthek said slowly, then we face a choice that transcends military considerations. We can attempt to destroy this evolved humanity through overwhelming force, possibly succeeding at the cost of our own transformation into something equally ruthless. Or we can attempt to understand what they are trying to teach us and emerge from this conflict as something greater than what we were. Or, Zektar said quietly, we can acknowledge that Lieutenant Chan and his people have already won. Not by defeating our fleets, but by proving that any species can transcend its limitations if the price of failure is absolute. They have shown us that strength is not about what you are born with, but what you choose to become when everything else is stripped away. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours and ranged across philosophical territories that military minds were ill-equipped to navigate. But, eventually, consensus emerged around a single truth: the human war had changed everyone it touched. The species that survived would not be the same ones that had entered the conflict. The question was whether they would choose their evolution or have it forced upon them. In the dark matter cluster beyond the galactic rim, Dr. Elena Vesquez studied the quantum field equations that had made Lieutenant Chan's sacrifice possible. The hidden human fleet, 57 vessels carrying the survivors of Earth and her colonies, waited in absolute silence while their scouts reported from Council space. The stellar bomb technology had been theoretical until 3 days before Chan's mission, when her team had finally achieved stable exotic matter containment. They had built exactly one device, given it to one pilot, and gambled the future of their species on his ability to use it effectively. The gamble had paid off beyond their most optimistic projections.
Status report from Cell 7, Communications Officer Park announced.
The Vortak Third Fleet has withdrawn from the Kepler 442 system.
Our tactical assessment was correct. They interpret our restraint as evidence of overwhelming hidden strength.
Dr. Vasquez nodded absently, her attention focused on the quantum mathematics that had consumed her life for the past 4 years. The stellar bomb had been impressive, but it was merely a crude application of principles she was only beginning to understand. The true breakthrough was not the weapon itself, but the discovery that reality could be fundamentally rewritten by beings who understood the mathematical foundations of existence. Her assistant, Dr. James Wu, approached with obvious excitement. The latest data from the reconnaissance probes confirms your theoretical predictions. The Council species are beginning to modify their military doctrines to account for our demonstrated capabilities.
More importantly, they're starting to question the philosophical assumptions underlying their approach to conflict. Show me. The holographic display revealed intelligence summaries from across Council space.
Military academies were incorporating human tactical innovations into their curricula.
Psychological warfare specialists were studying the concept of deliberate self-destruction as a form of strategic evolution.
Political philosophers were debating the implications of enemies who fought not for conquest but for the right to exist on their own terms. They're learning, Dr. Vasquez observed.
Just as Marcus predicted they would. Lieutenant Chen's final message had been more than a tactical communication.
It had been a philosophical statement that challenged every assumption about the nature of conflict, strength, and survival. By demonstrating that humans could literally transform themselves into something beyond conventional defeat, he had forced every species in the galaxy to confront the possibility of their own evolution. Dr. Wu said carefully, some of the other department heads are asking whether we're prepared for the implications of success. If the Council species do begin to adopt human approaches to warfare and self-development, we may have created rivals rather than enemies. Potential allies, but also potential threats on a scale we've never faced. Dr. Vasquez smiled, remembering her conversations with Marcus Chen during the years they had worked together developing the theoretical framework for exotic matter weapons. He had always understood that the true objective was not victory in any conventional sense, but the transformation of conflict itself into a tool for mutual advancement.
James, do you know why Marcus volunteered for the Stellar Bomb mission? Because he had lost everything and had nothing left to lose? No.
Because he had found something worth preserving and was willing to become whatever was necessary to preserve it. The weak self that he destroyed wasn't his grief or his pain, it was his attachment to what he used to be. He chose to become something new because the old version of himself wasn't capable of protecting what mattered. The distinction was crucial to understanding what humanity had become during the war years. They had not simply grown harder or more ruthless. They had evolved into a species that could consciously direct their own development, burning away limitations and weaknesses to reveal capabilities they had never known they possessed. The Council species are beginning to understand that they face the same choice Marcus faced, Dr. Vasquez continued. They can cling to what they have always been and eventually be defeated by their own limitations, or they can choose to evolve beyond those limitations and discover what they are truly capable of becoming.
And if they choose evolution? Then, we will have achieved something unprecedented in galactic history.
Not the victory of one species over another, but the elevation of all species to a higher level of existence. The war will end not because one side has defeated the other, but because both sides have outgrown the psychological frameworks that made the war necessary. Dr. Wu studied the intelligence reports with new understanding. The pattern of human attacks was becoming clearer, each strike designed not just to demonstrate capability but to force the target species to question their assumptions about strength, weakness, and the nature of effective resistance. The humans were conducting a galaxy-wide educational program, using military action as a medium for philosophical instruction. How long do you think it will take, he asked.
For them to learn what we're teaching? Or for us to learn what they'll teach us in response? The question hung between them, pregnant with implications neither was fully prepared to explore.
The transformation that had begun with Earth's fall was accelerating, spreading beyond humanity to touch every species in the galaxy. The outcome would determine not just the future of interstellar civilization but the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Marcus always said that the strongest person is not the one who never fails, but the one who learns from failure and becomes someone who cannot fail in the same way again, Dr. Vasquez said softly. The Council species failed to understand us initially. Now they have the opportunity to learn from that failure and become something greater. Whether they seize that opportunity or continue to repeat their mistakes will determine the shape of the next 1,000 years. In the quantum field laboratory around her, exotic matter containment fields hummed with energies that could reshape the fundamental forces of reality. But the true power lay not in the technology but in the consciousness that had learned to wield it, minds that had discovered how to destroy their limitations and rebuild themselves according to principles that transcended the boundaries of what any single species had thought possible. The war was ending, not in victory or defeat, but in metamorphosis. And, in the darkness between stars, Dr. Elena Vasquez smiled as she contemplated the beautiful uncertainty of what they were all becoming. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Lieutenant Marcus Chen had proven that truth with his life. Now it remained to be seen whether the rest of the galaxy possessed the courage to embrace their own destruction and rebirth. The teaching would continue until they understood. And, when they understood, something new would emerge from the ashes of what they had been, something worthy of the infinite darkness that surrounded them all, and strong enough to carry consciousness itself toward whatever waited beyond the edge of known space. In the end, the greatest victory was not the defeat of enemies, but the transformation of enemies into allies, rivals into partners, and weakness into the raw material from which true strength could be forged. The universe was vast enough to contain them all, if they were wise enough to grow into the beings capable of sharing it. The last breath of old humanity had been drawn in the stellar fire of Chan's sacrifice. What drew breath now was something new, something that had learned to choose its own evolution. And, in choosing, it had opened that choice to every conscious being in the galaxy. The teaching had only just begun.